6.
I'd bought Nicodemus with money I'd got from Lydia. At the moment, seeing him standing there holding my sword and glaring at me, I was disposed to curse her for that particular generosity. "Later," he said. "Tomorrow. Cut your throat tomorrow, master. Tomorrow I won't stop you, but today you have better use for your blade, like sticking pigs with it, for instance. Starting with your good friend, Avidius Publius. He organized the whole thing. Led it. He was the first to avail himself of. Does it seem strange to you that one of the feelings I have then was relief? Helvetia hadn't killed herself because I, weak and spineless, sought witless slave to my dangling gut, had gone down to Baiae with Lydia. She'd opened her veins because my friends, Aphidius, Publius, Virginius, Rufus, Sextus, Oppius, Flavius, Dolabella, Gabinius, Sergius, Calvus, Crispina, a dozen more, taking turns at her, lining up as though she were a Scorta, Erratica, and Ambulatrice Nautilus, a cheap street strolling whore. Helvetia. Fun, great sport, better than the games. Look you, friends and lovers, our little Caius Nathanius, our pretty little Jew, masquerading as a Roman, has gone to the Napolis, to Baiae. With Lydia, of course. Seems she can't sleep unless she's there to do what that ancient great-grandfather of all cuckolds, Valerius Caius, no longer can. If the old fool ever could, which I doubt. But do you know what our Nathianus has left behind? I followed him last night, so I know. A treasure. Hair like a sunset. Not bleached, born that way. Her own. Eyes like the sea of Sicilia. Breast. Gentlemen, I asked you, what are we waiting for? The rage that rose in me was strangely a healing thing, because it was outwardly directed, freed me of my self-loathing, even could be assuaged by the simple act of killing the swine who'd done this thing, which was precisely what I meant to do. But Nicodemus wouldn't leave me even that consolation, not even so much as the relative degree of freedom from guilt. Like a tigress, he was saying, she bloodied them all with her teeth, her nails, kept screaming, "No, I'm Nathan's. Can't you understand that, you goats and monkeys? I don't count. But when you touch, profane what's his, what's sacred to his worship, befoul my body before his lairs, his penates, you—" "God," I said. "She trusted you," Nicodemus said grimly. "Poor child. Poor, tender, simple child. That's why I won't stop you tomorrow, Caius Nathianus, my master. Tomorrow I'll hold the sword for you to run against." Then I saw that he was crying. "Go on," I said. "Publius, dog and son of a dog, ditch delivered by a drab who conceived him by—" "Tell me," I said. Told her, then said, "Why do you fight, Gallic Rose?" "Because of Nathianus." "Ha, that lewd little Jew has been betraying you this half-year and more with Lydia. Where do you think he is now? Where else but in Baiae, making the beast with two backs with the ancient whore who can't even get a quarter of an as for her worn-out favors anymore, and hence has been reduced to bestowing them upon your Nathianus." I hung there, What was in me had neither voice nor name. She stopped fighting then. No, not then. Not at that exact instant, but a little later, after a kind of afterthought hit her. After she'd searched her mind, put together all the bits and pieces, your frequent absences, the horror musk of Lydia's perfume that soaked into your very pores by now. Moecus, scortator, lecher, whoremaster. Aye, you can have me whipped, but I call you both unfaithful swine. Go on, I whispered. And it came to her that Publius hadn't lied. No, don't look at me like that. She didn't surrender to them, take that dirty sort of vengeance upon you for what she knew you were guilty of. She just gave up, went limp, inert, a slaughtered lamb, a poor little creature already killed. And I? And you, I said. I am a coward, master. You know that. But I went into your house, fought them all. Jupiter and Mars, witness it. Here, look upon me. See my scars. All right, I said. I am an old man, master. 60 winters have showed my hair, my beard. They beat me into insensibility. Oppius was for cutting my throat, but Publius wouldn't let him. No, he said. I want Lydia's little Jew lapdog to know. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. They bound me to a pillar and went about their sport. Ha! They aren't even mean. I'm 60 years old, but at that game, I'd have outlasted them all put together. Oppius couldn't. Too fat, I guess. His puny little... Stop it, I screamed. When they'd gone, she cut me loose. You found her? Buried her? You had to touch, lift her bloated, putrid... Nico, no. Little corpse. But I had to look into her eyes. That was worse, master. Far worse. She sent me to find her woman. Naturally, all your brave and loyal familia had fled at the first howl of those wolves. I couldn't find them. I haven't found them yet. I came back, and she was already in tub. Already gone. You? I whispered. I lost my senses again, seeing that. Fell to the floor. The water was red. The bathing room smelled like butcher shop. A butcher shop that had been sprayed with her lovely chaste perfume. Blood and scent together. Her eyes were wide open, staring. Upon. What? I said. I don't know. Desolation, I suppose. A ruined landscape, in which all the trees are bare and no bird ever sang. Upon the loss of hope, upon death, become a mercy. I was afraid, so I ran away. I didn't dare come back to the house until you'd return, master. I'm a slave, and the soldiers would have accused me of complicity in it. I couldn't bear torture, not any more. So now, get me out some clean clothes, I said. Bring them with you. Accompany me to Thermae, Agrippa's. Get going, Nico. He stared at me, his dark eyes filled with contempt. The baths, he said. To wash, perfume, anoint himself, to make himself beautiful for the ancient Bustoria. I stood there, held by the matchless aptness of his term. Because of the 12 separate kinds of prostitutes in Rome, each class having its distinctive name, the Bustoriae were the worst. They, hence their name, plied their trade exclusively in graveyards, befouling with their nameless perversions, their utter vileness, the very tombs of the pious dead. They profaned life and death both, it seemed to me, which in a way, surely, without realizing it herself, was what Lydia did. Then I said quietly, No, Nicodemus, only to spare you from having to wash my body afterward. The reason that your great Socrates went to the baths in the prison, so that I may die with my flesh at least clean. You don't imagine that I can do what I have to and live, do you? He went on looking at me. No, young master, I don't suppose you can, he said. When I came out of the bath, clean everywhere, except where it counts, the old slave looked at me a little sadly. What now, my master? He said. It came to me then that I was honor-bound to do something for him, who'd been left homeless and without means of subsistence by my death. So, with him trailing behind me like an ancient mournful hound, I went from one of the exagri sitting rooms of the Thermae to another, until I found a public scribe. He made ready his instruments, and I dictated the following note. To the divine Lydia, wife of Quintus Valerius Caius, from her devoted son, Caius Nathianus. Greetings. The bearer of this is my slave Nicodemus, who, while yet I lived, rendered me signal services. I stopped then, looked at Nicodemus. Or would you rather be freed, I said. To starve? Nicodemus said. I went back to my chore. The scribe's stylus fairly flew as he cut the letters into the wax smeared on his tablet. For which, by the love you bore me, my mother, I beg you to take him into your familia, your household slaves, and set him about light and pleasant tasks. Heed this request of one who will never ask you aught else in this world, and who bids you farewell, Nathan. Nathan? The scribe said. Caius Nathanaeus. It's a form of my name. How soon can you copy it out? On papyrus or parchment? The scribe said. Papyrus. It's of little importance. Now, at once, the scribe said. Go to it then, I told him. I've told you I'd been trained as a retiarius, yet now the fact was of no help at all. Of course, I was months out of training. Soft living had diminished my speed, my skill. But that actually was less important than the fact that a retiarius training is, if anything, too specialized. He must win, if at all, by lightning-fast feints and dashes. Let him just once fall into the error of closing with a great-thewed gladiator, and he'll surely be disemboweled. And now, unfortunately for me, the very circumstances wouldn't permit me to use the weapons with which my skill was undermatched. For a retiarius, trident and net couldn't be employed in a confined space. In a rich man's atrium, crowded with furniture, they'd be an actual hindrance. Therefore, I chose the one weapon that requires only an arm's length for its employ, and that can easily be concealed, the sika, or dagger, which I realized even then was a poor choice against men who had served one and all with Caesar's legions, and the smallest of whom outweighed me by 20 pounds. The result was ordained before I had begun. My failure was both pitiful and complete. When I came up to Avidius Publius' house, his nomenclature sang out my name. Avidius got up from his couch, where his epilatories were removing the hair from his body. He was a shaggy beast, almost like a bear, and put out his hand to me. Then he saw my eyes. "Your Gallic slave girl, eh?" he said calmly. "Sorry about that, Nathanaeus. I'll send you another. No, I'll send you 3. You'll have to wait, though. Flaxen-haired beauties like that one are plagued hard to come by in Rome." "You swine," I thought. I got out and laughed at him. I should have held it low, as every expert knife fighter knows, close to my thigh, and killed him with an underhanded upward thrust, which would have greatly lessened his chances of seizing my wrist. Which was exactly what he did, easily, at once. He'd been a centurion in the legions. His training in hand-to-hand fighting made his counter-moves instinctive. His big hands closed on mine, twisting. I managed to bring the point of the Sika down and rake his forearm before I had to let go of my weapon. The cut was very slight. It didn't even bleed much. He heard the dagger clatter to the floor and hurried me away from him with tremendous force. I stood there glaring, not even aware that those perfumed effeminates, the epilatories, had fled. Avidius stepped back a pace, clapped his hands. 6 gigantic, inky black Numidians came into the atrium. It was as if he'd summoned them up from the bowels of the underworld by spells and magic. I whirled like a trapped wolf. Wolf? Sheol and Gehenna both, like a cornered lady's lapdog, showing its tiny fangs and snarling. The biggest of the Africans grinned. His teeth were snowy, like pearls encrusted in midnight. I remember that detail. Then he brought his staff down in a smart crack that broke my right arm, straight across and cleanly. It sounded like a dried twig snapping. I stood there holding my arm and howling like a child. The Numidian saw the trickle of blood running down Publius's wrist. "Shall we kill him, master?" he said. He might as well have been asking the time of day. Avidius Publius smiled. "No, just give him a good beating and throw him out, Juba," he drawled. Then he sat back down, surrendering his burly body to the epilatories, who had come whining and creeping back by then. The scratch on his arm had already ceased to bleed. The Numidians were experts. I demeaned myself, begged mercy, implored them to let me go, but they kept right on beating me. Each time I fainted, those inky sons of sin and Satan awakened me by taking turns at urinating into my face. When even that device failed them, they lifted me like a slaughtered goat, with my tunic and ribbons sticking to my shredded back, blood coming out of my ears, nostrils, mouth, even the corners of my eyes, walked with me as though I were weightless, and slung my broken carcass into the street. I wasn't entirely out. I could hear the dark-toned drumbeat of their laughter. Some aeons later, I felt myself being lifted again. All the places I was broken on the inside pulled apart. My guts felt as though I'd dined on broken glass, washed down by vinegar, brine, and gall. I turned my head and spewed up great clots of blood. Then I felt something warm and wet splatter against my face. For an immeasurably brief fracturing of the stuff of time, my eyes cleared. I looked up. "Don't cry, Uncle Hezron," I muttered. Then night itself fell out of heaven and hit me on the head.
Seven. I opened my eyes. The sun was in them. Its glare was quiverful of arrows plunged into my pupils, so I turned my head sideways. The whole horizon rose, slanting skyward with ponderous, sickening slowness. Then, just as slowly, it dipped as though something or somebody wanted to throw me off the edge of the world. I heard the creaking groan of timbers. I knew then that I was on a ship. There was no mistaking that sound. I had heard it too many times before, when I'd been sent to Athens as a youth to further my Greek studies, cruising among the islands in summer with my Attic friends, on the long voyage to Rome, where I'd eloped with Helvetia. The sound of her name inside my mind was the tinkling of tiny silver bells, plunged into the wind and drowned. Then memory shaped itself into a blade and pierced my heart. I arched my head back, 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 dragged a long rasp of salt-tanged sea air into my lungs, but I never got that wail of pure desolation, utter anguish out for a hard, dry, bony hand, having the feel of parchment and a lingering smell of incense about it, clamped down over my mouth. "Hush now, Nathan," my Uncle Hezron said. My eyes must have cleared then. Something of the ferocious, mindless grief must have left them, for, after a long moment, he took his hand away. I didn't say anything. I lay there looking at him. He had on his tzitzit, the fringed garment that our sacred law requires us to wear, the tefillin, the phylacteries, those little leather boxes with scriptural texts in them, were bound to his temples and his left arm, near his heart. He'd even attached the mezuzah, the sacred sign, to the gunwale of the bireme we were on, having no doorpost to nail it to, as the law required. Which meant he'd been praying for me, and at the recognition of the further evidence of the great love my uncle bore me, my heart brimmed over and blind scalded my eyes. "Don't weep, my boy," my Uncle Hezron said. "You've wept enough now to last you a lifetime. Console yourself. We must seek healing for your heart and peace." I didn't answer him. Neither was possible, I knew that. This wound would bleed forever. I turned my head toward the other side of the ship. We were clawing away from a lee shore, a long grey, white, and yellowish spine of barren rock, half sunk in wine-dark seas. "What land is that, Uncle?" I whispered. "The island of Crete," he said. "We'll be home before too long." Home, I thought, but the word awoke no image inside my mind. Home was where Helvy was, and she. I lay there listening to the creak and groan of the ship's timbers, watching the gulls scribing white arcs against the blue of heaven, and trying not to think. My right arm ached. Looking down, I saw it was bound to a plank, which meant it was broken. Then I remembered that it was, and why. The great tears stole down from under my eyelids. "Nathan, please," my uncle said. My whole body was swathed in bandages. I had 4 fractured ribs, though I didn't know that then. But it was not of my physical injuries that I was dying. It hadn't been the Numidian's merciless beating, which had reduced me to a rack of quite visible bones, straining to burst through the yellowish-gray parchment of skin. That was all that covered them. No, it was something else, something that has no name. Call it total horror, insupportable grief, and you have but profaned it by setting labels thereto. Say that all of me, down to my wasted semi-carrion flesh, had no use at all for a word that had no Helvey in it. Say that mind, heart, blood, breath, spirit had taken counsel among themselves and unanimously resolved to die. Which was proved 1 hour later, when my uncle tried to feed me. He prepared the lightest, most delicate of foods, but they all came up at once, as soon as he'd got them down my throat, by clamping his fingers into my jaws, and forcing my open mouth. As I spewed them forth, I saw that they were terribly mixed with blood. Uncle Hezron bent his head and wept. I put out a trembling hand to him. "Don't cry, Uncle Hezron," I said. He turned his dark, fierce, tender eyes upon me. "You've no right, Nathan," he said. "Suicide is forbidden us by sacred law. You do this to your mother? Leave her with such a memory? My son Nathan starved himself to death over a foreign strump." "Uncle Hezron," I said. "All right, I'm sorry. I take that back. From what I gather, from your ravings, she was good, and you married her in Alexandria, according to our rites. Would God you could have stayed there? There are enough people of our race, our faith, in that city, so that in Rome there were even more once," I said. "When have our numbers provided us with any protection, Uncle?" "Never, I know. But what I don't understand is you, this poor child, by heaven. Nathan, all our patriarchs and kings took foreign wives, but they brought them under the canopy of the law. And this poor child, daughter of a Roman dog though she was, had demonstrated that she loved you enough to accept our way. Rather, it was you who—" "Uncle," I whispered, "let's not talk about it. Let's not mouth it over. Not now. Not yet. Please." He sat there staring at me. Above our heads, the seagulls mewed. "All right," he said. "But for your mother's sake, promise me you'll try to eat at least. Promise me, Nathan." I lay there thinking about that. I could feel deep inside me the stirring of something mindless, ancient, ancestrally deep. I didn't know what it was then. I don't even yet. But it must have been that stubborn instinct which, through the vicissitudes, has preserved the race. The witless, blind, unyielding will to live, in spite of all that had happened to me in some hidden corner of my being. I had it still. "I promised, Uncle Hezron," I said. I tried to eat. I tried. It did almost no good at all. Every morsel that went down my throat came up again, mixed with blood, or almost every morsel. Something must have stayed down, because as our byreme crawled toward Cyprus, I somehow stayed alive and conscious, which was the worst of all, because, try as I would not help remembering. "Yes," my uncle said, "it was Shimeon ben Melche who brought your father the news you were in Rome. And what was worse, your doings there, the kind of life you led. You remember Shimeon, don't you?" I nodded. "One of my father's friends. A member like my father of the Sanhedrin, titular head of a great mercantile family, whose business called him often to Rome. For though Tiberius had expelled my people from that city, he saw no incongruity in continuing to trade with us as a nation. It wasn't hard to guess what had happened. Shimeon had seen me by chance as I wandered about the streets of Rome, in company of that swinish crew I called my friends. Or perhaps not even that. Perhaps I'd been alone. To a devout Jew, my close-cropped hair, my clean-shaven face, would have been enough. We are forbidden, you know, to put iron to our hair or beard. My bare legs under my shirt tunic, my look of imitation Roman. But you, I said. Your father sent me, my uncle said. The degree of unrest in Jerusalem these days made it impossible for him to leave his post. The high priest depends on him, you know. And you dropped everything, came? Does not a shepherd seek the lost of his flock? My uncle Hezron said. As the Byreme crawled homeward, leaving Cyprus behind it, and I grew daily a little stronger, I deliberately dug into my memories with conscious cruelty. You see, by then I knew I was going to have to go on living, so I exercised endlessly, with crippling pain in order to train myself to bear it. It was something to do. It filled the dull, meaningless, slow-aching hiatus of my existence. It served much of the time, at least, to keep the sweaty, itchy torture of my broken body's healing from clawing through the surface of my mind. But, even so, the voyage itself was over before my convalescence was half begun. On the day of blinding sun, under a sky like hot melted pearl, my uncle Hezron carried my broken carcass ashore at Joppa. I, Nathan Bar Yehuda, was home again. Or was I? Would I ever be? If a man's home is where his treasure lies, the answer to that was simple. No. Never. From where I lay, I could hear my father's voice. It was curiously harsh. The grate and scrape of his irritation sounded through it. He just lies there, Joseph, he was saying, and stares at the ceiling. He eats the bare minimum it takes to keep him alive, and much of the time it comes back up again. When it does, the vomit is bloody, as though his entrails were torn. There was a silence in the interval. I could hear my mother crying. She had done little else since my uncle Hezron had brought me home. I see, my father's visitor said quietly. I recognized his voice. Yosef ha-Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin, one of my father's closest friends. What did the physicians say? That he is willing himself to die, my mother sobbed. And oh, good friend Yosef, it's true. What magic did that foreign harlot have that you wrong her? Yosef ha-Arimathea said, I've spent much time in Caesarea. Eli Sheba. I had to. This business of trying to get our Roman friends. The filthy swine, my father said. It was the first time in all my life I'd known his urbanity to desert him. Ah, but one doesn't say it, Yehuda, Joseph said. Let's say I went there to get our Roman friends, so our very kind and good Roman friends, to return the high priest's robe. And though they keep it, in the fortress of Antonio there, one must travel up to Caesarea to dicker with them. So I often saw that pretty child. She was daughter of the centurion Helvetius, and he is head of the procurator's personal guard, you know. Therefore my dealings with him were direct and frequent. A good sort of centurion, a believer in the old virtues, pietas, gravitas, simplicitas. We became quite friendly. I've had many a cup with that old lion. Gratus trusts him. So, whenever our good procurator has to treat with Antipas, whom he can't stand, he delegates the chore to Helvetius, which is why your Nathan happened to meet the centurion's daughter. Tell us about her, my father said. My mother sniffed. What is there to tell, Yehuda? We all know what Roman women are, strumpets one and all. The point is, gentle Elisheba, Yosef said, with patient irony, or ironic patience, it was hard to tell which, that we don't know what Roman women are. I'd guess that the vast majority of them are good, faithful, and pious, for the very simple reason that without those feminine virtues, organized society simply isn't possible. I also grant you that, since great power corrupts, Roman society is degenerating, but not to the extent you think. Helvetius invited me to his home. I met his wife, a blonde giantess bigger than he is, but a simple, pious, good woman. I know of no woman of our race who is any more decent morally that she is even giving those terms the accepted Jewish sense. And I was astonished when I met the daughter, tiny, delicate, dainty, so much so that it was strange that those two great northern barbarians. Perhaps my mother said he isn't. Don't say it, Eli, my father snapped. Don't let your worry and anxiety over Nathan distort your judgment, or still less your charity. Let us grant that Nathan's wife, my mother said, wife, married in the Grand Rabbi's home at Alexandria before the Rabbi himself, according to the law. By heaven, Yosef being mother of an only son disturbs a woman's reason, doesn't it? Only or many, Yosef laughed. About children, women are all mother hens. In simple justice, the child was Helvetius. Eli looked like him, as blond as fair. But I gather that you don't want to know anything about her, do you? No, I don't, my mother said. Look at my son now. And it's all her fault. Did she send Nathan to Tiberias, Eli? My father said sadly. Will you grant at least that their meeting was an accident? Yes, but you'll have to admit she ran off with him the next day after they met. A thing that no decent girl. Ellie, Yosef said. She's dead. She died horribly in defense of the virtue that you deny her, and only you, because even the filthiest tongues of Caesarea called her nothing worse than snow-maiding, attributing to coldness what your Nathan proved was honor. I think you ought to listen. Give Nathan credit for good sense. He was quite a gay lad with the women before he met her, so you mean he was a lecher and a drunkard, my father said sadly. My fault, Yosef. I undermined belief in him, and without belief virtue perishes. Being myself a doubter, I couldn't stand. No matter. Tell us about her. When Yosef had done with the tale, part of which he'd got from Helvetius' father, and the rest from my uncle, who knew it all from my ravings during the homeward voyage, my mother was crying harder than ever. She was especially moved by the incident of Helvy's sacrificing her hair to buy me food. All right, she wept. I forgive her, the poor little thing. But Nathan is dying, and we still don't know what to do. Yosef Arimathea hesitated. I could feel that hesitation. There are some people I know, he began, who live on the western shores of the Dead Sea, at Khirbet Qumran. You mean the Essenes, don't you? My father said. Ha, no wonder you hesitate. I've heard it said that you, my friend, are I've heard it said that you, my friend, are secretly of the mad persuasion. I respect them, Yosef said softly. It seems to me that the purity of their lives merits any man's respect. But I am not of their sect. I believe a man must live in this world and work out his own salvation in the midst of his temptations. The sons of Zadok, as they call themselves. But we are the sons of Zadok, my father said. Yes, but according to the Essenes, we Zadokim have departed from the true way, and they, and only they, are the spiritual heirs of Zadok. Be that as it may, they believe that a man can save himself only by living apart from this world's rottenness, by ritual washings, and by stern exercise of piety, which isn't what concerns us here. I can vouch for the fact that they've worked many wonderful cures in just such cases as this, especially among the soul-sick, as our Nathan is, because many come to them to be eased, to be cured, and almost always they send the sufferer away from them delivered of his demons. Then call them, my mother cried. Bring them here. They won't come, Yosef said. To avail yourselves of their services, you must carry the boy to them. It's not far off, a little below Jericho, near the town of En-Gadi. No, my mother shrilled. He can't be moved. He must stay home. He must, so that you can flutter and fuss and weep over him, my father said. How much good has that done so far, my poor Elisheba? Oh, Yehuda, my mother moaned. He's too weak. He couldn't stand. Yosef cleared his voice. There's another consideration, he said slowly, that neither of you are taking into account, my friends. So far, I'm sure that Helvetius doesn't know the boy is back. But how long, in this spy-infested stink of corruption that our lands become, do you think it will take him to find out? And when he does, he's a good enough sort, of course, but he's still a Roman. Even from where I lay, I could hear the breath strangling in my mother's throat. I've been told, Joseph went on, that Gratus is going to be, or already has been, recalled. I don't know who his successor is. Doesn't matter. In any event, Helvetius, as his chief personal officer, is sure to go back to Rome with him. So it's not all that bad, Elisheba. Some months, a year at most, and you can have your darling back again, safe and sound. Will he be? Will he be, my father got out, safe there? Perfectly. The Romans leave the Essenes strictly alone. They hold they've nothing to fear from a group of fanatics who spend all their time bathing and afterwards don't even oil their skins. I think they're wrong. I think the Essenes, or their descendants, the spiritual force they represent, will one day overturn the world. Well, my lady, Elisheba, Bath Boethus, Ha Yehuda, What say you?" "Oh, Joseph," my mother sobbed, "I'm so afraid I—" "Don't be, my love," my father said. "Well, Joseph, could you arrange it?" Joseph Arimathea said. "Yes, yes, surely. Give me until day after tomorrow, and I'll let you know. But meantime, keep watch." I heard his footsteps going away. After that, there was no other sound but my mother's crying.